Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Monday, June 14th, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. On today's show, Star columnist Vahe Gregorian and I talk about the Quin Snyder years at Missouri. He was the Tigers coach from 1999 until 2006, and the tenure ended with a mid-season departure. Whether he was fired or resigned, a little bit of both, I think. He was out in February. But Snyder marvelously has reconstructed his career. He's in his seventh season as the Utah Jazz head coach, and the team had the best record in the NBA this regular season. Heading into tonight's Western Conference semifinal game against the LA Clippers, the Jazz hold a 2-1 lead in the series. Vahe and I talk about the Snyder tenure at Mizzou, the good and the bad, and we marvel at how he picked up the pieces and, after Missouri, took the career road less traveled. Let's get started. We're here to talk Quin Snyder with Vahe Gregorian, but before we do, Vahe, I think this is the first time that you and I have been in a room together talking for a podcast face-to-face since I can't remember. This would be the first podcast that I've done that didn't involve Zoom or a telephone call, that was actually speaking to somebody sitting across from me. And I can remember you and I we're in the studio at the Star's office and getting George Brett and Denny Matthews and Kevin Harlan and people like that over the phone, both talking to them. You'd get a column out of it and I'd get a podcast. But just for you and I to have a discussion, this is a first in at least several months.
At least. It's conceivably just the one-on-one part, you and the two of us talking. I don't know. It might go back to pre-Super Bowl LV. Maybe.
It might be.
Because it was March. All of a sudden it was March after that, and we were probably out on the road a lot in February, and maybe we did something over at the then Sprint Center. I don't know, but it's been a while. Luckily, I see your face every now and then anyway, but you're a good-looking guy. It's nice to see you without the mask.
And we are absolute Zoom buddies. That's right, and we are maskless. We're distant. We're socially distant,
yes,
but we are maskless. And but like I said, the reason that we're chatting today is to talk Quin Snyder.
And vaccinated, I just want to say.
Yes,
okay.
fully vaccinated.
Yeah, sorry.
So let's talk Quin. And the reason we're talking Quin is because it's NBA playoff time. He's the coach of the Utah Jazz. He's in his seventh season. Utah had the best record in the NBA this year, so they're the top seed in the West. They're playing the LA Clippers in the Western Conference semifinals. The Jazz lead the series 2-1. They got smoked on Saturday, so the series resumes tonight, Monday. Jazz are favored, but who knows? It just seems like the NBA playoffs are wide open. I just thought, let's talk about Quin. Maybe they'll lose at some point, and we won't get a chance to do it. So I just thought, let's talk Quin while the Jazz are still alive. They are a terrific team. Donovan Mitchell's been great. Rudy Gobert is the best defensive player in the NBA, 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. But the reason Quin Snyder is very interesting to us is because of the 6+ seasons he spent at Missouri. Now, I was covering the Big 12 during those years, which meant I wasn't at all Missouri games, probably a handful of games each year. And I don't think you were the Missouri beat writer for the Quin years.
I wasn't.
For some of them.
You know, we had somewhat parallel lives going on. I was kind of doing a similar. You over here in Kansas City, you were more Big 12 emphasis. I was more a little regional footprint into the Big 10, but kind of just a little different sort of job than covering the beat, but with sort of, free safety opportunities to swoop in on the Missouri stuff, as I'm sure you did too. Absolutely.
I was writing columns then and would head over to Columbia or even on the road with the Tigers. And it was a fascinating time with Quin Snyder. Let's talk about, first of all, how he got to Missouri, why he got to Missouri, and the end of Norm Stewart. It's the 1998-99 season. Missouri's actually having a pretty good year. Albert White is their best player. Keon Dooling and Clarence Gilbert are freshmen on that team. And Missouri finishes 11-5 in the Big 12. They finished second to Texas. That was the Rick Barnes' only championship team at Texas. And the end of the season is near, and 64-year-old Norm Stewart finds himself out of a job. And to this day, I think there's still a little ambiguity about the Norm Stewart exit.
It's funny, there is, and I think it's still true that only 3 or 4 people really know. But you make me laugh on that point, just not to belabor this point too much. But I remember the day it happened, I was on the Metrolink coming back from the Final Four, and I got the call, like, Norm Stewart's out. I'm like, what? And made a flurry of calls, as I'm sure it was just as much of a story over here as it was in St. Louis. And the information I was getting from like 4 really good sources was completely conflicting. Like 2 said he was ousted, 2 said it was his choice, and that's how I wrote it. And I had an appointment with Norm the next morning. I've probably told you this story, but I go to see him, and I walk in his office, and he just looks up at me and goes, "I am incensed with you. I'm incensed with your newspaper. That article was ridiculous. Okay, what do you need?" And that's just kind of how it became with Norm. And I think he probably understood that there was intentional confusion around the situation. But to your bigger point here, the reason I get into that is that I do think there was almost a conscious, not that they were seeking the anti-norm, but they wanted something different. And I think Quin was 35.
32.
32.
He was exactly half of Norm Stewart's age.
Half Norm Stewart's age, the hottest young coach in the country. I'd been to a Duke game that year for a story on Chris Carrawell out of St. Louis, and I remember being in the locker room. It might have been the year before, but it was in the locker room and seeing that everybody in the locker room was gravitating to this assistant coach. Like he was holding court in the locker room, and so I gravitated, and he was enchanting. I mean, you could tell he was so smart, so charismatic, and around that time, his name starts popping up on these lists. And anyway, more than I needed to say on that.
Well, I can remember in the '89, in what turned out to be Norm Stewart's final year, Duke was phenomenal. Duke had a tremendous team: Elton Brand, Shane Battier. They went 37-2, got to the championship game in Tampa, lost to Rip Hamilton's UConn team. But everybody thought that was the best Duke team they'd ever seen to that point, and that was Quin was the lead assistant on that team. And what I remember is during NCAA tournament games, when the coach would do the halftime walk-off interview, it wouldn't be Mike Krzyzewski.
Yeah.
It was Quin.
Yeah.
So Mike Krzyzewski was preparing Quin Snyder to become a head coach.
Yeah.
And so Norm Stewart is out as Missouri's coach. That's the verb I think we'll go with.
Somebody, a guy at our paper, Kevin Horgan, I think, used the old Soviet term, like he was resigned.
Perfect.
That may be somewhere along the line. Sorry, go ahead.
So the job's open, and it comes down to a couple of candidates, one of whom is Quin Snyder. The other is Bill Self in his second season, I believe, at Tulsa.
They just gone to the Elite Eight that year, or was it the year before? Right around then.
Yes. It would be the next year they would go to the Elite Eight. He'd been to the NCAA tournament a couple times.
That's it. Okay.
And then the next year he took Tulsa to the Elite Eight. But Quin gets the job over Bill Self. And a new era of Missouri basketball begins. I remember being pretty excited about it, and I remember at the time thinking, look, they did get the number one assistant coach, maybe the hottest coaching candidate in college basketball was Quin Snyder, and Missouri landed him.
100% that was the feeling. I remember thinking, like, going to the press conference that day, just thinking, I can't believe they got this guy. And not really understanding, obviously, where Bill Self was headed. I do like to think about the parallel universe in which Missouri hired Bill, like where that would have taken Missouri, where it would have taken Bill.
Where it would have taken Kansas.
Where it would have taken Kansas. I don't think you go, in the modern era, I don't think you go from Missouri to Kansas. I don't think that would happen that way.
That would not have happened, I don't believe.
But the bigger point, again, is that was the choice Missouri made. And look, it appeared fundamentally sound, right? I mean, you're going to create, you're going to energize the program with this, fascinating guy who comes with this pedigree. Seemed like a home run.
It made sense on a couple of levels. First of all, the Missouri-Kansas rivalry, we all know what it is, what it has been. But Quin was part of the Duke-North Carolina rivalry. He was going to bring, he understood that.
Yeah.
What it was like to coach against your, hated rival. And so he was going to bring that perspective. Kansas at the time coached by Roy Williams from North Carolina, so we're going to have a little Duke North Carolina, as if Missouri-Kansas needed it. But it just it added to
another tier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Quin's first game against Kansas was stunning. It was in Hearn Center. It's it's a good Missouri team, and one that would go on and be in the NCAA tournament, but not a great Missouri team. And they blew Kansas out of the water. They destroyed them. I wasn't there covering it. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon game, watching it on television, and Missouri ends up winning by 22. They were never really threatened in the game. And this was a Kansas team that had Nick Collison, Kirk Heinrich, and Drew Gooden as freshmen. So it's a great – and I remember Quin coming to the post-game interview dripping in perspiration, just dripping. John Sunvold, John and I were talking about this last week. He was the one who did the interview, and Quin's got a big smile on his face. It could not have been a greater moment for a first-time Missouri coach against Kansas to win the way he won. And I just remember believing at the time, well, this is going to be fantastic. Missouri and Kansas with Roy established at KU, Quin coming in and doing this in his first game against the Jayhawks. Wow, how much fun is this going to be?
Yeah, I think that, and look, I think this is right, Blair. Missouri had the last NCAA tournament game Missouri had won at that point was its win over Indiana in Boise before it lost to UCLA. And then I don't think they ever won again under Norm in the NCAA.
They didn't. They had that terrible loss to New Mexico. Norm's last game was against New Mexico, right?
And so, Denver. Again, you're sort of feeling this like, okay, a restart, revitalization. And I think one of the things people really expected out of Quin, of course, was going to be this phenomenal recruiting. Meanwhile, though, while we're seeing this happen, we've got rumblings already of the trouble to come because that summer, before he even coached a game, they brought in, if memory serves right, it was Arthur Johnson and Ricky Paulding's parents on a plane flight. And the red flag there was that this was a rule coaches knew you can't do, and that they did. And there was just a weird little rumbling coming from that, like, what are these guys going to be about? And are they going to play fast and loose with the rules? And didn't he come from Coach K? And don't they batten down the hatches on these things?
It's like, is this what they did at Duke?
Yeah, and how much the public-private question about record searches and things like that. That wasn't quite yet at that point, but it did sort of make a little mini tremor, like, what's going to be happening? And of course, it became a frantic and sort of chaotic era, and arguably I think you could even say corrupt. I mean, there were a lot of problems to come, which I bring up now at most, not to dump on that. I think it's a really important point to make when you see somebody have such success now that this is a redemptive story, and I don't want to dominate like I already have.
No.
But I
could finish the thought, but I do want to go back to the beginning years of Quin at Missouri.
Yeah, just that. When I'm speaking about these things, I'm really thinking about the arc of from where he came to where this is now, and we can get into that more. But I guess I just want to make that point. I don't want to bludgeon the past and all that, but it is the foundation of this story.
Right, and it's instructive that things were happening very early in Quin's career that spoke to the troubles that he had toward the end of his tenure at Missouri as well. Some of the bigger moments of Quin's in big decisions that were early in Quin's career were he had to convince Keon Dooling and Clarence Gilbert to come back after their freshman year, re-recruit them. And Kareem Rush was part of was in the recruiting class that year. So these were all big moments for Quin Snyder, and he got them all. He got the Dooling and Gilbert to come back, and he got Kareem Rush to sign with Mizzou, and those guys ended up providing the foundation for some nice teams that Missouri and Quin Snyder had. So in Quin's second year, they beat Georgia in the NCAA tournament and then lose to Duke.
And then to Duke. Okay,
I think that
was Marquette. What year was Marquette?
That was later. That was in 03.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So that's Quin's second year. They go to, I think, in Greensboro. They end up losing to Duke in the second round. So it was a great story for Quin to come back and play Duke in North Carolina. It's the third year. So the 2001-2002 season, expectations are really high because all these guys are back from Missouri. And actually, the Tigers climbed to number 2 in the country and win their first, I don't know, I think 8 or 9 games and climb to number 2. Of course, they lose to Illinois because that's what Missouri did in those years. Lost a bunch of games in a row to Illinois, and they stumbled. It got out of the polls. It was like oh my gosh, this season is spiraling out of control. They get to Selection Sunday, and they are the last team in. Now, this was before we knew the NCAA announced who the last team was. But again, I'll refer back to John Sunvold. He was working for CBS at the time, and CBS official told him that Missouri was the last team in the tournament that year, and they were the number 12 seed in the West. And what do? They just go on this tremendous run. I think Miami was the first. They beat Miami. The Ohio State was part of that.
Wasn't UCLA?
And UCLA, Jason Capone's team, UCLA.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 they beat. I forgot the order, but it was Miami, Ohio State, and UCLA. And then they play Oklahoma, the team that just Kelvin Sampson's team with Hollis Price and Qantas White that always gave Missouri trouble, and they beat Missouri in the Elite Eight. But so 3 seasons in, he has. I know he's beaten KU twice at Hearn Center the first couple of years. And in his third season, they get to number 2 in the country and then lose in the Elite Eight. I think the Quin Snyder future is just really, really bright at Missouri.
Yeah.
There's one more year where they go back to the NCAA tournament. They beat Southern Illinois and lose to Marquette. Is that how it went?
I think so. I think that's right.
They lost to Dwayne Wade's Marquette team there. And so that's 4 years, 4 NCAA tournaments for Quin Snyder. And by now, Ricky Paulding, Arthur Johnson, that group has replaced Dooling and Gilbert, and they're the new, it just seems like talent had replaced talent there. But then trouble comes for Missouri after that 4th year. And let's take a break. And when we come back, you and I will talk about the final years of Quin Snyder and then what's happened to Quin since then. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. Okay, back with Vahe Gregorian, and we're talking about the Missouri career of Quin Snyder and what it means, and what Quin Snyder is, how he's parlayed failure at Missouri into success today. We talked about the early Quin years, Vahe, and there was a lot to like about those in terms of success on the court. But you mentioned in the first segment that he did some things that you just kind of wondered about, with the rules, and I don't know if it's fair to say, well, everybody does it or everybody's doing the work in the gray area or whatever, but it would certainly raised eyebrows and some questions. And in his final 2.5 years at Missouri, he didn't go to the NCAA tournament. the controversy around the program just was it was incredible. Drama all the time, and that final year was just one day after another of nothing, just headline news, drama. Oh my gosh! So in years 5 and 6, they don't go to the NCAA tournament; they go to the NIT, and one year they win a game, and the next year they don't. But they're 500 type years. I remember. There was the pressure was building on him. Pressure was building on Missouri to make a change, and maybe things got a little desperate for Quin in recruiting, and he ends up with a recruit who is the ultimate embarrassment for the program.
Yeah, and that's of course Ricky Clemens, and there's a long tangled story to Ricky Clemens, who was, as I recall. In a pretty precarious situation as a kid. I think that he was abused, moved around, a really troubled young man, and I have naturally sympathy for that, but also that begins to become a problem when you're a troubled young man and you're being brought into a program with those troubles and no apparent way to work with him. And it was, in a way, it epitomized those last couple of years, because it just seemed like, to your point, they were, I don't know if desperation was exactly it, but inside it was. I mean, I think that they were like, well, we need to do this because we need him, because we need to win, etc. And I remember one of the things that defined that time was thinking of it this way, that their argument for not knowing about what was going on with Ricky Clemens was sort of superseded by their argument that they could make unlimited calls to him because Lane Odom considered himself a mentor to Ricky. Like the whole, and that's one of those things, people do operate in gray areas, but not sort of brazenly, and this was not quite well finessed, and there was just, and it was part of just this bubbling feeling all the time, right? There's always something like, what is happening there? I remember going, it was 2006, right? I guess when Gary Link made the move.
Yes.
And I was in Torino for the Olympics, and I remember getting there, and the Missouri Mafia is everywhere in the media.
Yep.
And like the first 7 people I saw in Torino, Italy, are like, when are they going to get rid of Quin Snyder? What's going on there? And it was like, it just kind of gave you an indication of how widespread the feeling was that something was not right.
When I think back at the Clemens story and saga, there were the jailhouse tapes, there was the ATV accident, embarrassing moments certainly for Missouri, but those weren't NCAA violations. The NCAA violations were the recruiting, and there's some a lot of academic questions raised about Ricky Clemens, and Missouri ended up getting 3 years of probation, but they didn't have to. It was a loss of scholarship and recruiting off campus, which are killers for college basketball. But they didn't lose postseason eligibility. But at that point, it didn't matter. They were not a postseason type of team. So Quin Snyder is back for his 7th year. I'll never forget the game against Illinois. They lose by 32. At Scott, I think it's Scott Trade Center.
Yeah.
And as he's exiting the floor, popcorn rains down on him. Somebody spilled their popcorn bucket on him, and he doesn't even stop. I wish Quin had just turned, shaken his fist at the guy or something, or pointed. Instead, he just keeps walking with the popcorn raining down on him.
Yeah. It was a terrible sight.
Terrible sight. Yeah. Embarrassing, and nobody deserves that.
No.
A few weeks later, they lose to Baylor by 26 points. And this was Baylor being what it is today. This was Baylor when Baylor was at the bottom of the Big 12, and then comes the ridiculous messaging when it comes to the firing of Quin Snyder. How do you remember that playing out?
I just remember thinking, like, in a time where Missouri, you couldn't make this stuff up, it just kept blossoming that way. Like I've still never had a talk with Mike Alden or Gary Link about the dynamics of that. I mean, in fact, the Star was on that story in a way we never could at the Post-Dispatch. We didn't, at least as I recall.
Mike DeArmond was covering Missouri for us.
Mike had the inner track to that in a way that we never got to in St. Louis, and that was just, but it was so par for the course at the time. Remember, that was part of what led to dissension with whether Mike Alden should make the next hire, and even that drama when Mike Anderson was being hired of whether Mike Alden was going to retain his job that day.
That was that Sunday in Columbia when it looked like Mike Alden was going to be out of a job, but wait, they fired their basketball coach and Mike Anderson was hired. Turns out by the end of the day, Mike Anderson was the new basketball coach and Mike Alden was still the athletic director. But just as I understand it, Mike Alden and Quin Snyder obviously were not communicating very well at the time.
Yeah.
So it's Gary Link who's the intermediary between Mike Alden and Quin Snyder. Mike sends Gary to tell Quin that he'll be fired at the end. This will be his last year. You've got until the end of the season. And Quin basically the next day resigns after telling the media earlier in the week that he was not going to resign.
Yeah.
But on that, I think it was a Friday, he ends up resigning, and it's Melvin Watkins who finishes the year for Missouri. So Quin is out of a job. Missouri's kind of in shambles right now in basketball, even though they did beat KU that year. That was the Christian Moody missed free throw game.
Oh, yeah.
Thomas Gardner scored 40. It was a great I'm pretty sure that was the Moody game, but I do remember Missouri won, and Thomas Gardner was great.
Yeah.
But
like 32 or 38, maybe
I think
it was 40.
40.
Maybe it was 40. Yeah.
But so Quin is out of basketball. He basically spends the next 8 to 10 months out of basketball altogether. I don't know where he was at the time. But he becomes the head coach of the Austin Toros of the NBA's G League. And his road to redemption starts, in minor league professional basketball. He lasts 3 years there, and he does a terrific job. They win more games. He sends more players to the NBA than anybody else during that time in the G League. Goes from there to the NBA, where he's an assistant coach for 3 different teams over a 4-year period. But in the 4th year, he spends in Moscow, coaching in the Russian professional league in Moscow. And it's kind of amazing. Mm-hmm. So after that stretch of being an assistant coach in the NBA and in Moscow, in 2014, he's hired as the head coach of the Utah Jazz. I guess, in all honesty, I wasn't keeping up as much with Quin at that time.
No, me neither.
I do remember him being in Austin. But anyway, he gets the head coaching job at Utah, and I think first 2 years they're not in the playoffs, but they've been in the playoffs ever since. And now they're, if not the best team in the NBA, one of the best teams in the NBA, and it's just a remarkable achievement for Quin Snyder. I'm really happy for him, and I'm pulling for him.
Same here.
I'm absolutely pulling for Utah. I need a horse to back in these NBA playoffs, and Utah's the one I'm backing.
Yeah, I feel like you do about him, and I feel like it a little bit because we automatically have a little sense of connection to him from him being here, but really more so because you sense he's paid his dues, he's had tribulations. The Austin Toros part of this is a kind of really cool part of the story, as is Moscow and all that. But it makes you feel like, all right, he knew he was on the wrong path. He was going to stay in coaching, right? But I guess he recognized during that time. I don't think it was ever thought he was going to go back to collegiate coaching once he went to the D League. I just don't think he thought that. I don't know. I haven't spoken with him about it. I don't know what he thought, other than I'm in the moment and I'm doing this now. And I think there's something else about him too, though, that is part of this. I just feel like, however you want to term it, he either grew up or came to understand something about himself that he hadn't when he was coaching at Missouri. And I think you alluded to this in the story you wrote today. Question of fit. And I don't know if the fit was a question about being in Columbia. I don't think it was that. I think it was about whether his particular unique skill set plays better as a collegiate head coach or plays better as an NBA head coach. I guess we have the answer.
I think we do. He, in an interview, at some point while he was early in his Jazz career, he said something about in the G League, you can make mistakes and really nobody notices that. And it got me thinking, if Quin's first job out of Duke had been at a mid-major and not, Big 12 Missouri, high profile, Power 5, all that, where he could have made mistakes and nobody noticed, would he have been better served on that trajectory than coming straight from the Duke bench to the Missouri head coaching position?
Yeah, and it's funny that I hadn't thought about it when you referred to that quote. I hadn't necessarily thought about it that way, that he was maybe more broadly saying that. But in a manner of speaking, maybe that's the point he was making, because he was obviously quite scrutinized in Columbia. And scrutinized in ways, again, that maybe they weren't used to at Duke. It sounds funny, right? They had incredible publicity at Duke, but also he wasn't the head coach, of course. And I think also at a school of that nature, you're not, the lens is different. And I think that it was, one way or another, it's not suitable to him the way it was. So yeah, imagine put him in Carbondale for 2 years. And maybe that changes the trajectory. Maybe.
Yeah, perhaps. John Sundvold also mentioned something that I didn't put in the story, but it resonated with me, that going from a private school at Duke to the state's flagship public university is a bigger jump. Not a jump, but a bigger transition than maybe some people realize. That at Duke, you probably get to pick and choose. As an assistant at Duke, you really have very little responsibility other than gravitate toward players in the locker room. Players gravitate toward Quin in the locker room and be that guy. And Mike Krzyzewski handles the CEO duties of the program, and he gets to pick and choose the duties that he wants to handle. When you're the head coach at Missouri, and this is true of a lot of state, flagship schools and state universities, you're touring the state from time to time, right? You're, as John Sundvold reminded me, you're going to Higginsville, to Hannibal, to Sedalia, to barbecues, to social events, representing the university and your basketball program, and glad handing and doing all the things that you have never done before, are doing for the first time, and may not be terribly comfortable doing it.
Yeah. And
taking away from the coaching aspect of the job. And for a 32-year-old or 33-year-old who had been nothing but about winning basketball from his high school days at Mercer Island, Washington, and Seattle, to his 3 Final Fours as a Duke point guard, to getting on the bench. He spent 1 year as an assistant for the LA Clippers before going back to the Duke bench and serving under Mike Krzyzewski, going to that great team they had in '99, and now all of a sudden being asked to do some things that you've never done that may not be terribly comfortable for not in your wheelhouse, so to speak.
Especially not in your wheelhouse in a part of the country where you've never lived.
Very unfamiliar,
right? If he went back to Mercer Island or around Seattle, if he was in Carolina, maybe those things just sort of unspool in a different way, and it's just he's just in his element. But he wasn't in his element, and for a lot of reasons that you just said. There's 4, 5, 6 reasons that it's a sort of just a lot of contrast and not discomfort necessarily, but things that are new to him. We just put it that way, new to him entirely. So
So Missouri basketball has had 4 coaches since Quin Snyder left. Mike Anderson, Frank Haith, Kim Anderson, and now Konzo Martin. They've had successful years. Mike Anderson went to an Elite Eight. So did Frank Haith didn't, but had the great team.
That was one of the best teams I ever saw. And it was a shame that they lost to Norfolk State.
2012. Kim Anderson didn't work out at all.
Yeah.
And Konzo Martin has been to a couple of NCAA tournaments. But there hasn't been really the stretch of success that Missouri knew for those first 4 years under Quin, when they won five. They won 5 NCAA tournament games and did get to an Elite Eight. So I don't want to say that if it had worked out, if Quin Snyder had been able to build on the success of his first 4 years, maybe he'd still be at Missouri. Who knows? Or maybe he would have been. He'd be the Duke successor, to Krzyzewski now. But as it turns out, he took the road less traveled to redeem his coaching career. First of all, he decided to stay in coaching. He didn't let the Missouri experience just sour him completely and end up becoming a stockbroker, right? Yeah. He stayed in coaching. And I think one thing that we need to appreciate about him is he was such a high IQ guy, and he got to study the game under Mike Krzyzewski, Larry Brown with his year in the Clippers, Greg Popovich while he was with the Austin Toros, which are associated with the San Antonio Spurs. Here's a smart guy who associated himself with some the greatest coaching minds of all time, and maybe that's what we're seeing with the Utah Jazz right now. Yeah,
I think so. It makes sense if you look at it over time, right? All the influences he's had, the obvious charisma, the obvious IQ, understanding of the game. I think really understanding of people. I think it's funny to think about it this way, Blair, but this is probably true. He was so what was he, 38, 39 when he lost his job at Missouri? Probably the first time in his life he'd failed. I mean, in any notable way.
Right? Has to be, right?
I mean, at least let's just say in terms of career, basketball, whatever. I mean, the thing that we know him best for. So you're right. You go kind of two ways from that. I mean, but clearly he caught himself. I mean, one way or another. I do wish. I hope. At some point, like let's say they're in the NBA Finals and somebody's there, like Blair Kerkhoff is out there, and get them talking about. Just tell us about what you learned from Missouri.
The lessons learned at Missouri.
Because as you point out in your story today, it's hard. I've never found the story where he talks about what he learned from Missouri. I think you were looking for it, and I don't recall ever seeing that.
Couldn't find it.
And one way or another, he seems to like to talk about Austin as being his pivot point, but really, Missouri is. I mean, if you really get right down to it.
Absolutely it is. It's the place where it stopped, and then Austin becomes the new beginning.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but it's not the turning point. I mean, the turning point is, what do you do now after Missouri? It's really interesting, and I'd like to think he'd be open to the discussion, but there seems to be a reason he hasn't been. I can't imagine he hasn't been asked.
And we haven't been in a position.
Right,
really.
We've not been around him. It's just not, it's a different sphere than we're able to be around typically. Yeah.
Oh, well, you're right. If they get to the NBA Finals, there are big media opportunities.
Yeah.
I've covered NBA Finals, and every day the coach talks to the media, whether they're playing or not, even the off days. So maybe that'll be the opportunity. I hope so. I don't think we would cover it, but and maybe they'll be on Zoom calls. Unlike this conversation, which is in person, thankfully and happily. Maybe if it is a Zoom thing, maybe we can jump on.
Yeah, well, we should stay alert to it.
I have enjoyed this conversation, Vahe.
Same, Blair. Thanks for having me in your crib.
We'll do it again. We'll find another topic to discuss sometime. That'll do it for today. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of Derek Donovan, Beth Welsh, Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, Chris Fickett, and Savannah Smith. Tip of the cap to Vahe Gregorian for stopping by and talking Quin Snyder and Mizzou. Links to stories can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Got another deal for you. You can subscribe to Sports Pass for 99 cents a month. That's right, 99 pennies a month. Sports Pass is the online version of the Star sports section. You get all the stories that appear in the print editions of the Star, plus additional stories that appear only on the website, and of course they appear first on kansascity.com. After 3 months, it auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless you cancel. How do you get it? You go to kansascity.com/sportspass2020. That's kansascity.com/sportspass2020. You want more than just sports coverage? Check out the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus additional national news, sports, and business coverage with the e-edition. The details for all of these deals can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. If you're having trouble hunting down any of the offers, you just send me an email, bkerkhoff@kcstar.com, and I'll get you to the right place. So whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Tuesday with another episode. I bet we talk Royals.